Hey, great to have you here. So happy Halloween, everybody. With the end of Halloween also comes the end of the Brad Hawk Talk 13 Horrors of Halloween. Just want to do a real quick video recapping my ranking of each of those 13 movies and just giving my quick overall thoughts on each of them. Of my 13, starting at number 13, we had The Strangers Chapter 1. This is one I gave a 2 out of 10. Really wasn't a big fan of this. Thought the original movie was okay. Felt like it replicated a lot of that, but just made changes in areas that didn't make a whole lot of sense and made kind of a worse film in my opinion. Hopefully Chapter 2 comes out a little bit stronger. So the next 4 films I had all as a 3 out of 10. So kind of stack ranking them somewhat with minuscule differences between them. At number 12, we have The Watchers. This is a movie I didn't really enjoy the plot. I feel like it was a little bit slow paced and boring. The only interesting aspect we had was the older woman from their journey in the forest wound up being one of the half fairy, half humans, which a lot of that was somewhat obvious. And the journey we took along the way to get to that point didn't feel really worthwhile. Number 11, we have The Babadook. This is one I was a little torn on because I know this movie has a high place in horror and it does a lot of things right. The idea of it is very strong and it's an effective movie for what it's trying for. It just, once again, similar to The Watchers, is a boring journey in my opinion to take. While I appreciate the concept of it, it's not something I really want to rewatch too frequently. Next up at number 10, we have Under Paris. Not really sure what it wanted to be. It was like a horror movie with sharks attacking humans and also had this political message as far as climate change. So it didn't feel like it fit really either of them super well. It tried to balance something super silly and something super serious. And ultimately we got something kind of ridiculous in the outcome, but there are some decent scenes, but overall it's just kind of your typical shark creature feature type film. Number 9, we have Hellfest. This is one I like the vibe of the Halloween aesthetic to it with going to a haunted house and a theme park where you're getting into the Halloween spirit. This is definitely one that I feel like fits October a little bit. A lot of the decisions made by characters though were not smart and it just overall wasn't that strong of a film. Only interesting aspect I really appreciated was the end where you had the villain who seemed like just a regular person. So just giving that message of anybody could be a serial killer next door, similar to one I'll talk about a little bit later here. Next up, we have 2 5 out of 10s that I have to rank as well. I'm a little torn. I think both of these, if I'm being honest, could be a point or so higher, but I'm gonna stick with this for now. We're gonna have Thanksgiving at number 8. This is one I really enjoyed watching as far as providing somewhat of that Scream type vibe where it's a whodunit with a little bit of a silly slasher included. This one went really over the top silly with the Thanksgiving theme to it. Somewhat predictable villain at the end. Effects weren't as strong as I was hoping for, and the plot, not the greatest in my opinion. And the motive for the killer, so it did a lot of things fun, a lot of things right, but I think there was a lot of just gaps and things that didn't really work too well for me. Then number 7, we had Ouija, Origin of Evil. This one is a supernatural film that works really well for me. I'm not a fan of possession, supernatural horror type films. So getting this far in the rankings with this film means a lot. I think it's a really strong film. If you're into that subgenre, definitely check this one out. But I'm not a big fan of it, so it does a lot well. It's not something I really enjoy watching in particular. Then we have 2 6 out of 10 scores here. We have at number 6, we're going with Summer of '84. So this is one I feel like I enjoyed the entire movie for the most part, where you're having that nostalgic 80s vibe with these group of kids that are just running around the neighborhood trying to figure out who's the killer here, and they think it's the neighbor. I think the really lacking part for me was the ending. I know what they were going for, but I didn't appreciate the killing of the little kid. I feel like he had a rough upbringing already, but they chose to kill him off. I think they try to show some shock factor a little bit in there, but it's one that I would have appreciated them just avoiding, just having the villain either win or lose at the end, but don't have, that kid die. Would have been a point or so higher if they had a stronger ending in my viewpoint. This is also one that had kind of the same vibe of, hey, your neighbor could be a serial killer. Next up at number 5, we have Trick or Treat. So this is another one I gave a 6 out of 10. And I mentioned before, I watched this the first time last year. Wasn't a big fan of it. Upon second watch, enjoyed the multiple stories and timeline twists a little bit more. Enjoyed the intent behind Sam. I understand he's kind of the protector of Halloween, if you will, and just honors the Halloween tradition. So him in this role makes a lot of sense. And the movie clicked a lot more for me this time around, even if it's still a little goofy and has some gaps here and there. Next up at number 4, we have 2 7 out of 10s. And I was really torn on where to put these, probably the most of any of the films. I'm going to go with The Thing at number 4. And I know this is a very popular film. It's somewhat of a classic for a lot of people, especially with the practical effects. I think that's really what the strong suit of this film is. The cool visuals there that don't require CGI to be successful. I think a lot of films in the modern era could really take from this. Having the uncertainty as far as who's infected, who's not is kind of a fun aspect. But there are times, if I'm being honest, where the film is a little bit slower. And I think it's just because it came out in the 80s. There was a different approach to film that took place back then. And I think things are a little bit more fast-paced now, where I don't need something necessarily constantly going on, but there's definitely some lulls in the film where you're trying to build tension, but it's kind of, if you're not really interested, you could fall off a little bit. That puts number 3, Sinister. This is one I really enjoyed upon first and second watch. It's a cool concept about this Bagul who is possessing the house, and through the film, he can access your realm. I like Ethan Hawke as a character. I like the journey he takes. Kind of silly ending where he makes the decision to move, and he's a little bit too aggressive, I think, when he's trying to look at the film and then suddenly just bails. A little bit of a mixed ending for me, but I think the film's journey it takes as we uncover what's going on with this mystery is a fun ride to take ultimately. It's one I would recommend you watch as well. Next up at number 2, we had Evil Dead 2013. This is one I gave a 9 out of 10. This was a really strong film. I like the plot of it. I like the logic behind some of the decisions made. I like the character growth. I like how we go from the character that's least likely to live being the one that survives in the end. I think the only criticism I would have of the film is kind of the setup of the film requires the one kid to open the book and read it out loud. That's really the flaw of the character's decision to make, but it's required to kind of develop the film. I just wish they maybe would have had a better reason for him to do so and to read it out loud to himself. It felt like maybe give me more incentive to believe why he would be choosing to do that. Other than that, super strong film. That leaves at number 1, which was my 10 out of 10, The Faculty. I will openly admit this is very nostalgia driven. It's a movie I watched as a kid, has a lot of famous actors that I grew up watching, and just the combination of everything. I like the Invasion of the Body Snatchers vibe to it. If I'm being genuine with it, I'll say CGI is rough. If you've only watched it for the first time recently, you may not appreciate it as much as I do, having watched it for many years at this point. But it's one that I think is an enjoyable ride regardless. You'll just realize this is a little bit dated as far as some of the visuals. So that's my list of my first 13 horrors of Halloween. What are your guys' thoughts on each of these 13 films? We'd love to see the feedback down below. How would you rank them? Are there certain areas you think I got really wrong or really right? We'd love to see your input there. As mentioned, there's a few of these that probably stick out to a lot of people, like The Thing. I know a lot of people really love, so curious on any feedback you guys have overall. Appreciate you so much for watching and hope to talk to you again soon.